Everybody, welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today, I'm very happy to bring on a new guest, Jesse Beltran. For those of you who are not familiar with Jesse, let me tell you a little bit about him. Jesse Beltran is a certified master hypnotist and a leading expert in the fields of frequencies, implant technology, and Havana syndrome. He currently serves as the president of Mind Nexus, where he spearheads transformative seminars that bridge the gap between science, space, and spirituality. With a diploma from the nationally accredited Hypnosis Motivational Institute in Tarzana, California, Jesse combines advanced training with over a decade of real world experience to offer unique approaches to stress reduction, phobia management, PTSD treatment, and performance enhancement. Today, Jesse is recognized as a visionary leader, frequently speaking at events, seminars, and retreats on topics such as the impact of frequencies on human health, the dangers of implant technology, and the realities of Havana syndrome. His career is a testament to his unwavering dedication to public service, innovation, and the power of the mind. All of the links are featured below in the description. Please do check me out, subscribe to my channels, leave me a comment, like my videos, and share my content with your friends. And I'm happy to announce that you can now join my YouTube channel to take advantage of my perks and help to support this show. Without further ado, bring Jesse to the stage. Welcome, Jesse. How are you today?
Hi, Karen. Doing wonderful. And as always, thank you for allowing these types of platforms to disseminate important information that the general population, everyone across the globe, really needs to hear.
Yeah, it's vitally important. Absolutely vitally important. Now, I'd like you to start off by telling us, how did you get involved in all of this and what has that led to?
Okay. Well, back in around 2010, I happened to be at a conference in Austin, Texas, and I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall. And for those of you who don't know, my background, um, early on, I've been in the medical field, both in radiology. I was a cardiac telemetry tech and then became a firefighter, paramedic, and helped initiate paramedic 911 services in a few cities here in California. Later on, I became the vice president of a IT company, and we were instrumental in creating, before high-speed data was available via cable and fiber, we were doing microwave technologies via line of sight for corporations to function and transmit this data. That being said, I have a little bit of a technical background, well, actually quite a bit, but I'm being humble there. And I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall in Austin, Texas at a conference. And him and I got on a topic where he was seeing individuals who were having unusual phenomenons in their symptomology. And what he described was, he said that they were having an acute onset of these strange sounds they believe was being transmitted to them. And then it was followed by vertigo, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, and ultimately short-term, long-term memory fog incidences. And he felt that if this was truly a signal that was being emitted, that there should be some way to detect these signals. And so there's a famous investigator who was involved in the Iran Contra trials. Her name was Melinda Kidder. And she was utilizing this methodology that Dr. Hall was talking about. And she would use a little device which is called the JM20 Pro frequency detector. And it is designed to detect frequencies within an environment, and you can attenuate it down to where you only have to be, within a centimeter or two. of the emission, and it will detect it. And we live in a wireless society, so it was important that you had a mechanism to do that. Nonetheless, he was sporadically scanning these individuals who had these complaints and coming up with some interesting results. There were some positive detections. And then I said, well, isn't that enough uh, to start an investigation or at least get their doctors to do something and investigate it further? And he said, no, it isn't. So back in 2010, the mindset was because medicine is trained drastically. Growing up as a child, it was preventative medicine. Now it's more about treating the symptoms. So what was happening, he said, is when they went to their general practitioner, like everyone is trained to do, is they were being diagnosed with a mental health disorder and forced medicated and or worse, uh, uh, forced into an institution against their will. So I decided to investigate this a little bit further. And because this happened to someone who was very close to me and dear to me, in Sacramento, California, I put out a flyer asking the community, if you're suffering from these symptoms, please contact us. We'd like to talk to you. So I expected maybe a handful of people to show up, but 100 people showed up, standing room only, and they all had the same exact symptomology complaints with very, very little deviation. So I knew I was onto something. So I decided to take these subjective complaints and create a way that we can make them more objective, utilizing what Dr. Hall had initially confided in me with. And so we decided to start doing this RF scanning on a mass scale, utilizing a combination of surveys and videotaping the results. And so we held our first conference in Davis, California, and over 300 people showed up. And this was a huge surprise to me, but I knew we were onto something big. And so we started doing the RF scanning there in California, and an interesting picture started to develop. We were getting positive results, and there was what appeared to be an ethnic cause behind this. And what I mean by that is those who were most prominent with these complaints were Caucasian women, highly educated, single, recently single, widowed, or divorced. Then Caucasian males, and African American females, African American males, Asians, Hispanics, and it dwindled down from there. Then we did the same testing in the Midwest with the exact same results. And it changed a little bit when we got to Chicago, and just because of the demographics there, I believe, is that the Caucasian and African American criteria switched. African Americans were number one and Caucasians were number two, and that remained consistent all the way to the East Coast, with one exception anomaly in Virginia, where a group of military subcontractors asked me to come and do the testing there. And that specific event, I started testing for suggestibility. And the reason that is because I noticed that throughout the United States that there were certain segments of individuals who were completely devastated, and these were very intelligent people, doctors, chiropractors, attorneys, lawyers, who were losing $1 million businesses because they were affected by this. And because society, when you go to anyone and you say you're hearing this strange sound, automatically you're looked at as possibly having some mental health issue.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, in 2016, our diplomats in Havana, Cuba, started having some weird complaints. They started having these weird sounds that were being transmitted that they were hearing in their head, followed by nausea, vomiting, vertigo, severe headaches, long-term, short-term memory fog. And initially, the United States government dismissed this as hysteria, and at one point, they even tried to blame it on crickets, until the Canadian diplomats started having the same complaints. When the Canadian diplomats started complaining of these symptoms and this effect, The Canadian government did a little bit better than the US government initially and supported them and started investigating it. And that's when the United States took it seriously. And last year, 2024, May 8th, the United States held a congressional hearing by the Department of Homeland Security. And in that meeting, a gentleman by the name of retired Lieutenant Colonel Greg Egren gave testimony to Congress that this phenomenon is real. It is happening, and it's happening on our homeland, and it's happening to the very best of our best. Not only in our diplomats, but the best of our best in the CIA, the best of our best in the FBI, and now it is happening to members in Congress and their family members. The one downside of that hearing is they sort of skirted over the issue on whether or not this was happening to civilians in the general population. And each one of the witnesses there skirted that. They say they only work with federal employees and their family members. Now, I can tell you this, because of our work that we started in 2010 across the United States that ultimately led to Europe. Europe heard what I was doing and offered to invite me to come and scan some of their diplomats and family members. In addition, they asked me to bring over anyone that I thought was a victim of this. And the reason this was important, Colonel Egren said in his testimony in front of Congress that they believed that this was a directed energy weapon, so a beam of some sort being sent to these individuals. And in some cases, this was true. But our hypothesis is that these individuals could not escape this signal. And so we said, well, there has to be something unique to these individuals that allows them to receive the signal. And we would take individuals deep down miles into granite caverns where there's no radio frequency emissions. You couldn't even get a radio signal on your car, no cell phone emissions, nothing. And we would take them down, and we were still detecting the signal, which ultimately led us to believe that this has to be satellite in origin. So, and we also believe that the uniqueness of these individuals had to be something internally within them, because we could only say that we are detecting RF emissions at very specific focal areas around the human body. And those areas were the right and left TMJ, so right in your jaw, the superior dorsum, the occipital portion of the head, the base of the posterior base of the neck, right and left shoulders, apex, abdomen, and lower lumbar areas, right and left hips, and occasionally down in the knee areas. And then we would get anomalies, and usually if there was an anomaly, and which was very rare, it's usually because they said that they had some type of operation in that specific area. So what our hypothesis is that we believe that this emission or signal that we were detecting could possibly be coming from the human body. So what Europe allowed us to do is I had to sign an NDA, and they allowed us to use a research facility there that had a chamber called an anechoic chamber. And this is a very robust, they cost millions of dollars, and they block out huge frequency spectrums. And in this case, it blocked out 8 kilohertz to 18 gigahertz. And we knew that the frequencies that we were detecting were well within that spectrum. So we used control groups. We brought in people who were not suffering from this, put them in the anechoic chamber, put our equipment out, and our equipment would read 0 for frequency emissions. Okay. But it changed when we brought those who were scanned in the preliminary RF scans. And when we put them in that environment, we were detecting signals at those very specific focal areas that they came up positive in the preliminary scans. It was at that point that we could say with confidence that these emissions are most likely coming from the human body. And I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to show everyone One of our earliest clients, her name is Bonnie Kellerby. She's allowed us to share her information now. And I'm going to pull up what we discovered. In the Bonnie Kellerby case, we'll talk about this one in a second. I
I
apologize.
think maybe I have to add it. Do you want me to add it?
Or I think you have to allow me to do screen sharing. Is that possible?
Um, I'm not sure. From what I've done, I see it here. I can add it to the stage anytime you want, but I'm not
Okay.
sure I can allow you to do that from right now because I didn't make you a co-host.
Oh, I see. Okay, because
Yeah.
typically I could share my screen. So this is going to make it quite unique. How are we going to do this? I'm not
You could just
sure.
tell me when you want it, when you want me to share it, and I'll share it, and then tell me when you want me to
Okay.
take it off. How's that?
Okay, that's fine. So go ahead and share. Can you see this report? It shows some redactions. Just let me know when you can.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is a photomicrographic report on specimens, 3 of them, that were removed from Miss Bonnie Kellerby.
Hmm.
And chain of custody was done. All protocols were followed. And what they found is these were foreign body specimens of advanced material. And what this advanced material turned out to be is these were biosensors. Now, this is what they look like. They're very tiny. They're approaching nanosize. We were dealing with nanosize now, but
Hmm.
this was in 2018, and they were very, very small. This is a nanowire.
Hmm.
Our bodies don't reject them, so you'll get human growth tissue growing over them.
Hmm.
But nonetheless, they come in various styles and types. And these were the 3 that were pulled out of Miss Kellerby.
I've
Um,
actually seen these before, or very similar to this in the research I've done on implants. So that's quite interesting.
yeah. Here is another. I wanted to show your audience. I'm going to share another screen, and you can go ahead and put that up there, and let me know
Yep,
when you can see it.
yep, it's up.
Okay, so this is in a late 2009. I mean, 1999, 2000. This case, these are images from a case called the Bob Boyce, I mean, not Bob Boyce case, but the Dave Larson case. He was a
Hmm.
politician out of Southern California. And the only reason I like to show this image here is because I want the audience to understand just how small we're talking about these implants are becoming. This
Hmm.
is the 2 letters on a penny. This is basically the size of 2 letters on a penny. Now, out
Hmm.
of Mr. Larson, they pulled out over 10 of these, and they come in various shapes and sizes.
Hmm.
And he actually sued, and he lost. He sued because he didn't know they were going to do this to him. And the judge threw his case out because he inadvertently signed up to participate in an experiment, but he was never given full consent, full
Hmm.
informed consent. And that's important. Leaving out any of this information is basically tricking someone into
Hmm.
being experimented on. And that's what happened to Mr. Larson. Now, over the years, these implants have shrunk substantially. This
Hmm.
is the Bob Boyce case that I've talked about. He actually had, I won't go into in depth, but he actually developed cancer. They found not 1, but 2 of these chips in him.
Hmm.
The first one disappeared. The second one, they were a little bit smarter. They used chain of custody. And it ended up, when they checked the serial number on it, going back to an NSA database, and it was basically stalled there, which takes me into what we've discovered. recently, and I'm going to be pulling up something that's going to shock everyone. And this is going to be something that fell on my lap recently.
Mm-hmm.
And can you see my screen? It says Summary HR 34,
Yes.
114th Congress. Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So this is the 21st Century Cures Act. And the 21st Century Cures Act was legislation that was supposed to address our response to the opioid abuse epidemic. But what they did is they hid a little section in here, section 3024, that makes clinical testing of investigational medical devices, implants, and drugs no longer requires the informed consent of the subjects if the testing possesses no more than minimal risk to the subject and includes safeguards. So, since 2016, here in the United States, under this particular piece of legislation, it has been legal to non consensually experiment on American citizens unknowingly
Mm-hmm.
under this minimal risk criteria. So then I was curious, so what is minimal risk defined as? Who
Mm-hmm.
oversees it? And how can we verify that it's being followed? Well, in this legislation, it makes all data that they collect through experimentation of this type protected under national security clauses. So even if you attempted to find out if the minimal risk criteria threshold is being adhered to, you wouldn't be able to even start to get out of the starting blocks because it's going to be stonewalled, just like the Bob Boyce case,
Mm-hmm.
and protected as a national security issue. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, okay, well, maybe we look at victims who have uh, been subjected to, I apologize here, who have been subjected to this type of experimentation prior to 2016. And this is where the biggest shocker was for me, but it shouldn't because the United States has been notorious in
Mm-hmm.
experimenting on American citizens, not only here, but non American citizens abroad without
Yep.
consent. Okay. And
Yep.
so I wanted, what I found out is that there's this thing called the rule of law. And And under the rule of law, this has been legal since the late 70s here in the United States to do.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the problem. I wrote this white paper. Actually, I finalized it today. And basically, here is my executive summary that I've put. And what it does is it examines the growing ethical and legal challenges arising from Section 3024 of the 21st Century Cures Act, particularly its
Mm-hmm.
provisions to waive informed consent for human
Mm-hmm.
experimentation. Okay, and it addresses minimal risk. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but here's the crazy thing: in 2024, President Joe Biden codified the Cures Act, and what he did, they now make it legal for private entities to also be protected by this. So
Mm-hmm.
in 2024, this already controversial policy was codified to extend national security based data protections to private enterprises. As a
Mm-hmm.
result, experimental research conducted without informed consent can now legally occur behind the dual shields of classification and corporate secrecy with no public or independent oversight. Okay?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this raises urgent concerns beyond belief about the integrity of ethical review mechanisms, the erosions of informed consent principles, and the
Yeah.
increasing invisibility of experimental programs involving U.S. citizens. Now, every
Well,
nation, particularly North American nation, has a
mhm.
very similar law or legislation that protects them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important. This is a wake up call because what we are finding, at least back in 2010, we have many cases where these implants are being removed,
Mm-hmm.
and most individuals who sued over this end up having their cases thrown out because they approached
Mm-hmm.
it from a civil rights violation issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a couple of cases that are working their way through, but they took a different approach. They didn't use the civil rights position. They
Mm-hmm.
used personal injury because they were
Mm-hmm.
able to pull out the bullet. You have the smoking gun.
Yeah,
Now, people say this sounds like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist thing. Not until we
not to
started
me.
pulling out implants. Yes.
Not to me.
um,
Can I
yeah,
just can I just get you to pause for a sec, Jesse? Because
sure.
I have a couple questions, and also there might be a few things that the audience or the listening audience might not understand. So we talked about that these frequencies are very real. We talked about how they're affecting people's health, what demographics are generally targeted. We've also well established today about the implants. Now, the part that's missing that I would like you to elaborate a little bit about is where are the frequencies coming from? What are the frequencies and what are they trying to achieve by emitting these frequencies? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then afterwards, I do have a couple questions from the chat.
Sure. So these are biosensors. These are just basically electrical components that receive and transmit data in real time.
Mm-hmm,
In the
mm-hmm,
Dave Larson case, that's what they were doing. That was down in Southern California. And basically, those implants were transmitting real time data to these towers that they had up that had receivers and transmitters on them.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So this is what they're doing. And depending
mm-hmm,
on the frequency that is being emitted or transmitted, you can cause these sensors to do uh, numerous amounts of things. But
mm-hmm,
typically back then, the technology, well, I know through some FOIA release reports, okay, and here's the sad thing, is our most vulnerable in society are the ones that they experiment on first.
mm-hmm,
And then they come to us out in the general population.
mm-hmm.
In those FOIA reports, we have learned that as early as 1972, they were experimenting on prisoners, not only at Vacaville Prison, at Tescadero, in the mental institutions. They
Mm-hmm.
were using these type of um, biosensing technology to experiment on people. And back then, it could even transmit real time data, including they could see your thoughts and your environment. And
Mm-hmm.
that is the critical thing to realize here. That I have a case here that we're going to show you, and it's the Don DeVore case, and it's out of California. And Don DeVore's actually lived right around the block from me
Mm-hmm.
in Elk Grove, California, and she was a nurse for the Department of Corrections who found out that they were illegally experimenting on prisons. She found out about this program.
Mm-hmm.
And because they have zero tolerance in disclosing wrongdoing, according to uh, the State Department of Corrections there, she
Mm-hmm.
was just fulfilling her oath and blew the whistle on this project. And they sought out to terminate her and ultimately ended up making her a victim of this program. Don
Mm-hmm.
DeVore had those exact same type of implants that we pulled out of Bonnie Kellerby, pulled out of her, surgically excised.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what's really compelling, that's really got me on this journey that we're at today, is that in the disclosure phase, and there were a lot of naysayers that tried to say these documents were faked, but Don DeVore ended up suing in pro se at some point, and so she had to do a lot of corrections. So there were many files done. And in that, we were able to find this IBM document that needs to be shared, because this is a smoking gun. This is the undeniable um, reference to the fact that this was done, and this was being done not only covertly, non-consensually,
Mhm.
but it was not meant to be found. And I'm going to share that
Mhm.
next. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Where is it's the Don DeVore case? Go here. Podcast reports. And IBM exhibit. Okay. So this is a Don DeVore case. This lawsuit, she did many amendments, and so, but there was a lot of great information. And one of the things discovered was this document here. Here's the court case, and it's readily available to the public. You can go look this up, and all of this information is there. And it's a document that was meant for only high-level personnel within the Department of Corrections. And it's the IntelliConnection, a security division of IBM. Okay, confidential, limited distribution, only level 9 communication. And the title is 2020 Neurochip Implant. And here's what it says. The control of crime will be a paramount concern in the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when the demand for them becomes popular. Our Research and Development Division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and the Massachusetts Department of Corrections to run limited trials of the 2020 neurochip implant. We have established representatives of our interest in both management and institutional levels within departments. Federal regulations do not yet permit testing of implants on prisoners, but we have entered into contractual agreements with privatized healthcare professionals and specified correctional personnel to do limited testing of our products. We have also had major success in privately owned sanitariums with implant technology. We need, however, to expand our testing to research how effective the 2020 neurochip implant performs in those identified as the most aggressive in our society. Limited testing has produced a number of results. In California, several prisoners were identified as members of a security threat group. Okay, it's always on the auspice of protecting society. They were brought to the health services unit at Pelican Bay and tranquilized with advanced sedatives developed by our Cambridge, Massachusetts laboratory. The implant procedures takes 60 to 90 minutes depending on the experience of the technician. We are working on a device which will reduce that time by as much as 60%. The results of implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Okay, this first one is probably the most important. Remember back when I said through that FOIA release, we have that document that shows that we have been experimenting on prisoners with this type of technology since the 1970s. And in
Mhm.
that, they were able to read their EEGs, so their thoughts. Now,
Mhm.
here we're a little bit more sophisticated. It says implants served as a surveillance monitoring device for the threat group activity. Implants disabled subjects during an assault on a correctional officer. All they had to do was send a frequency to the implants, and it basically remotely tased them. Universal side effects in all 8 test subjects revealed that when the implant was set to 116 megahertz, all subjects became lethargic and slept on an average of 18 to 22 hours. You were asking earlier, what do these frequencies do? Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. All subjects refused recreation periods for 14 days. 7 of the 8 subjects did not exercise in their cells. Each subject was monitored for aggressive activity during the test period, and the findings are conclusive that out of the 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression even when they were provoked. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose and ears 48 hours after the implant due to the initial adjustment, and each subject had no knowledge of the implant for the test period, and each implant was retrieved under the guise of medical treatment. So these prisoners had no idea that this was even in them. It
Mm-hmm.
should be noted that the test period was for less than 2 months. However, during the period, substantial data was gathered by our research and development team, which suggests that the implant exceeded expected results. One of the major concerns of the security and the R&D team was that the test subject would discover, a chemical imbalance during the initial adjustment period, and the test would have to be scrubbed. However, due to advanced technological developments in the sedatives administered, the 48-hour adjustment period can be attributed to prescription medication given to the test subjects after the implant procedure. So instead of your body
Wow.
trying to fight off this object that's been put in you that you're not
Yeah.
aware of, they're blaming it on the drugs. Okay. And one of the
Yeah.
concerns raised by the R&D was the cause of the bleeding and how to eliminate that problem. Unexplained bleeding might cause the subject to inquire further about his routine visit to the infirmary or other healthcare facility. The
Mm-hmm.
security windfall from the brief test period was enormous. Security officials now know several strategies employed by that threat group that facilitate the transmission of illegal drugs and weapons into their correctional facilities. One intelligence officer remarked that while they cannot use the information they have in a court of law, because they know it's illegal, they now know who to watch out for and what outside connections they have. The prison at Soledad is now considering transferring 3 subjects to Vacaville, where we have engaging implant research. Our technicians have promised that they can do 3 2020 neurochip implants in less than an hour. Soledad officials hope to collect information from the trio to bring a 14-month investigation into drug trafficking by correctional officers to a close. Essentially, these implants make the unsuspecting prisoner, now here's where it gets interesting, a walking, talking recorder of every event he comes into contact with. There are only 5 intelligence officers and the Commissioner of Corrections who actually know the full scope of the implant testing. Now,
Wow.
I can tell you these victims across the United States and through Europe. Colonel Egren testified that this is happening on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. They all claim, and what really the most intrusive part to them, along with the physiological torture that they go through in torment,
Mm-hmm.
is that
Mm-hmm.
they say that their thoughts are no longer private. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In Massachusetts, the Department of Corrections has already entered into high level discussions about releasing certain offenders to the community with the 2020 neurochip implants. And here in the United States, I don't know if you're aware of, during the pandemic, they were releasing prisoners by the hundreds to thousands across the
Mm-hmm.
United States.
Yep.
How many of them have this in them? Okay. Our
Mm-hmm.
people are not altogether against the idea. However, attorneys for IntelliConnection have advised against implant technology outside strict control settings. Under the present governmental structure, our liability would be enormous. While we have a
Mm-hmm.
strong lobby in Congress and various state legislatures favoring our product, we must proceed with the utmost caution on uncontrolled use of the 2020 neural chip. If the chip were discovered in use, not authorized by law, and the procedure traced to us, we could not endure for long the resulting publicity and liability payments. I don't think I need to read this anymore. That's probably enough
Wow.
for the audience to really get a good sense
Yeah.
of why I'm sharing this.
I want to ask you a couple things. Well, I want to say hi to Denise and Maya who are in the live chat. I want to ask you a couple things. I have to be careful how I ask it due to censorship. But there was in Canada where I live, there was a strong, that's not even a good word, strong enough word, but there was intense pressure and coercion for people to take a medical procedure back in 2021. And those who did not were heavily penalized, couldn't travel, weren't allowed in public places. It was a huge ordeal, very traumatizing. And so there's that. And then there's also the whole issue of chemtrails. A lot of people talk about what they call Morgellons, and there's evidence that a lot of that is coming from the chemtrails. And I'm wondering, what is your opinion on both of those? Could they be a source for this nanotechnology? And there's also evidence that this nanotechnology is even self-assembling once it gets into the body. What are your thoughts about those two possible connections?
Okay. So I just did a presentation. There's a gentleman out there by the name of Dr. E215, and he gave a TED talk, a med TED talk in Israel. And he was the creator of these nanorobots. Okay. And he stands before the audience and he's holding up a syringe. And he says, in the tip of this needle is 1,000 billion robots.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 billion. So a trillion in the tip of a 1 cc syringe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So most people know someone who's a diabetic and has to give themselves injections.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 1 cc syringe. Okay. So imagine a trillion robots in the tip of that needle. He goes on to demonstrate what they look like and what you can do with them. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, you can load them up with any payload and send a radio frequency emission to them,
Mm-hmm.
have it open up and release whatever internally in it. Okay. It's all controlled by radio frequencies. In addition, he even says each of these things has an IP address
Mm-hmm.
and it can be controlled um, with any type of control stick that you play on your video games.
Mm-hmm.
And he demonstrates it to the audience. Okay. Now, technology innately of itself is not good or bad. It's those who are in power and control of the technology that make it good or bad. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because we now know that we have been looking, there are studies out there where they're looking at the xylocaine derivative, for example, that you use when you go to the dentist or you get a cut and they want to numb you up. Any type of stitching or surgical procedure, when they get started, a lot of times they'll use this.
Mm-hmm.
And under high spectrum microscopy, they have found these nanobots in them, dispersed evenly. But when you expose them to an RF emission, they start to self-assemble.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them into like microchip arrays.
Mm-hmm.
They are self-replicating and they can attach to your DNA and they cross the blood-brain barrier. I will
Mm-hmm.
say this, there's an interesting phenomenon. When we started doing this RF testing back in 2010, there were maybe 8 locations that we would find on average.
Mm-hmm.
Today, now we're finding 14 to 16. I've had one exam where it was 17 locations that came up positive for an RF emission around the very specific focal areas around the human body. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to wonder, is this what we're dealing with?
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, I highly suspect that this is the case because a lot of the medications out there are now being studied, and they are finding this nanotech in it. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're we're in a worst case scenario. Pandora's box has been opened, and now
Mm-hmm.
what do we do with the fallout? In light of what has fallen to my lap with regards to the Cures Act, and now in 2024, January 22nd of 2024, to be specific, President Biden codified it, which allowed
Mm-hmm.
private entities to do this now to you and still
Mm-hmm.
have the same protections under national security. So there are no checks and balances to see whether or not these entities or even private entities out there are adhering to the threshold of minimal risk. I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you this, that over the years that I've been covering this, I know of around 27 suicides that people have done with these exact same symptoms. So I
Hmm.
would argue, and we know that's the extreme of this, losing a life. And in that testimony, Colonel Egrin and the witnesses were asked, "Do you know of anyone who has lost their life to this?" And they did
Hmm.
say yes. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this is how many families has this destroyed? How many
Hmm.
people have been falsely locked up or incarcerated or force medicated or force institutionalized um, because of this program? And it is protected by national security protections. You
Hmm.
have no way to fight it. So there is no oversight whatsoever. And I would argue this. And they've given so much power now uh, to these government health agencies
Hmm.
or under the auspices of national security that I would argue that democracy no longer exists if these types of laws exist. That we can go all the way
Oh,
back in history.
absolutely.
Yeah, MK
Absolutely.
Ultra. Yeah,
Yeah.
MK Ultra, the Tuskegee experiments,
I
the
was just going to
radiation
say that. See,
experiments.
they've been experimenting on human beings in North America that I know of from the research I've done for so many years. This is not new. And sorry, I'll let you finish, but then I have another question.
Mhm. No, no, that's what I wanted to just to remind everyone.
Hmm.
Um, it, right now is a very, very vital time in human history, if we want to continue to call it the human experience. With
Yeah.
this advent of nanotechnology, and try to stay up on what is happening out there in academia and in research.
Hmm.
Most academia, based on their studies, will say, and the literature says that they can change a species within 6 generations. Now, there's a Dr. Hildegard Staniger is probably one of the foremost experts in the world on this nanotechnology. She was far ahead of her game.
Hmm.
She was way ahead of this ball many, many years ago and was touting her horn about this is out there and this is coming.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? She was spot on.
Yeah.
And she believed that you can change a species within 1 generation with this. So then the thing is, all of these laws are created for humans. At what point are they going to just basically blindside us and say the laws don't apply to us? And
Well, I
that's
was
what
gonna
needs to happen.
That's what I was going to say. I have seen the documents, but I don't have them to share today, where what the governments have done is said that if people have had gene altering therapy, let me just call it that they're no longer under the Constitution because they're no longer fully human because of the transhuman agenda. They have now become something else, and so all the laws that protect natural human beings no longer apply to them. And so basically, they have no rights. The second thing I want to check with you is many of us did not get the medical procedure. We didn't trust it. We did our research and we didn't get it. But I have heard that because of the contagious nature of this nanotechnology, that now everybody is infected. And I just wondered if you could comment on either of those points.
You are absolutely correct. Okay. Um, remember, a trillion robots in the tip of a 1 cc syringe. Okay. So this can be absorbed, this can be ingested, this can be inhaled.
Hmm.
Um, so, in my opinion, I would suspect that this contagion, and based on what Colonel Egrin has testified, that this is on every continent with the exception of Antarctica, that the
Hmm.
majority of the globe has been exposed to this stuff. Now, talk about a national security issue here in the United States. I'm not sure of the statistic there in your country in Canada, But in the United States, 95% of all medications are made outside of our
Yes.
country. And the
Yeah. In
majority
China.
of them, and a lot of them are made by our enemies.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
would we ever do this? And
Hmm.
I'd be curious to look at the statistic in Canada as
It's
to
the same.
what
It's
percentage
the
of their
same.
medications are purchased outside.
It's
Yeah.
the same. I've also heard reports and seen research where they can actually, if a doctor prescribes a medication or a pill to you, they can actually tell whether you've taken it or not. How could they do that unless they had the technology that you've been telling us about today? So I think there's many delivery systems for this technology. In my opinion, I'm not educated the way you are, but in my opinion, based on the research I've seen, it's in all of us. And so that leads me to one other question before I get you to go back to what we can do about it, if anything, and how we should be preparing our lives to try to, oh, I don't know, get the best out of our life with all this going on. But sorry, I keep forgetting what I was saying. There's so much information in my brain right now, Jesse. Thank you
Yeah.
so, so much. But I'm wondering um, if there's more at play here than telemetry. So you've talked about how they can track us, they can record conversations, they can know every detail about our health, they know who we're in contact with, where we're not. There's all of that. But is there another reason? Is it to dummy us down? Is it to provide a kill switch at some point? When needing to shut us down if we get to the point where let's say we're revolting. I mean, what are the other applications of this technology that we might not have considered so far?
Well, that's a loaded question. So there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Barry Trower who's out of the UK.
Mhm,
Back when I was the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies, my team had the opportunity to go personally visit him and interview him. Now, he was a microwave weapons specialist. He was an agent and he did interrogations. He did all the stuff that you would expect an agent to do. But he came out and started whistleblowing about this frequency technology.
mhm,
Um, he can tell you exactly what frequency emission you need to send to someone to give them a heart attack, spontaneous miscarriages, how to kill people,
mhm,
um, or affect them in a very very devious way. He said
mhm,
putting voices into someone's head was the easiest thing to do.
mhm,
Um, okay. And this is where I'll go into the United States. There's a document called New World Vistas, and it was put out by the United States Air Force in 1994. And it was a document put together by our greatest minds on how to make the United States Air Force the superpower 50 years into the future. And for those of you, like I said, do your own research, but I'm going to tell you very specifically where to go in it. It's a 222-page document. On page 89 of that document is titled Biological Processes. Now, it's important that you read it all. They are already planning this. Now, with this technology, using electromagnetic frequencies, they know how they can affect the human body, including they talk about inducing voices in someone's head. Okay.
mhm,
Not only are they talking about inducing voices in someone's head, they talk about how you can imprint and erase memory sets with this technology. Okay.
mhm,
And this is where we get in. You spoke earlier about you were doing research on alien implant technology where implants were removed, looking at the implants that we have from our cases that have been removed. They're very similar. I wonder why.
mhm,
Okay. Then you have the MyLab, those who say that they've been abducted by the military and implanted, and those
mhm,
implants who have been removed. Um, they're all the same. They can all be traced back to a biomedical research company or a private entity who works for the Department of Defense,
mhm,
who are investigating neurotech. Okay. So, what happens? Because you're asking what this is about. This is
mhm,
ultimately about control, right? Because if you
mhm,
can control the masses, You have the ability to stay in power through voting
Yep.
for a very, very long time. You
Mm-hmm.
also have the ability to cause chaos, divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of ultimate control. And if we now have the technology, and I can do this as a master hypnotist without this,
Mm-hmm.
30% of the population is highly suggestible. So we already know right off the bat we can induce this in 30% of the population. I
Mm-hmm.
can embed memory sets in you and I can erase memory sets in you. If I was
Mm-hmm.
unethical, and you would not know the difference. You
Mm-hmm.
would fight me to your grave that you had that experience, or you
Mm-hmm.
would fight me to the grave that you didn't have an experience if it was
Mm-hmm.
erased. Okay. Now there's a company called Codify. Now I encourage you everyone to Google it on YouTube. Codify: the future of incarceration, and it specifically talks about if you commit a crime, what the future will hold. They'll put these implants in you. They'll use this device to embed memory sets so you can experience exactly what your victim felt,
Mm-hmm.
what the family members felt, and all of the turmoil you caused. This sounds like a good thing. Um, and you'll have a choice when you get convicted. You can either choose, and they'll up the term limits for the crimes 100 years, 200 years. Or you can do this rehabilitation through Codify, and they'll put in these memory sets, have you go through all these experiences, and you'll think that you were in prison for 50 or 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and watch that video. If you think I'm kidding, it what I'm saying is just a feather on the truth. They're even talking about after they've done this to you, to bring in your family into therapy so they can teach you how to assimilate with your new memory sets. Okay.
Oh dear.
Then at the end, they start to talk about, oh, we can use this for Alzheimer's, dementia. We can put their memory sets back. So you
Hmm.
see how they slowly migrate it back out into the general population. And my
Mm-hmm.
question to you is, what happens when your human experiences or your memories are no longer yours? Do you trust your government entity or anyone else for that fact to have the power to manipulate those things? And that's where
You
we're at
know,
today.
you know what it reminds me of, and I'm not saying this is or isn't true. I don't know. So I'm not trying to say this is a thing, but it is interesting the different shooters that have been running rampant in the United States and what they had in common. And I'm not going to say more because I don't want this video to get censored. But I think they're already experimenting with that. The other thing is I don't see a lot of justice in this world. How many people who may be wrongly accused having to go through that kind of treatment? But bottom line, it's like some people or whatever, I'm not sure even if they are people anymore on this planet, they want to have godlike powers. And they have, like, psychopathy is a real problem amongst leadership. And, I'm pretty concerned. So we've talked a lot about all these horrifying things, but it's information I think we need to know, Jesse. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on and sharing it, and in such a nice, succinct way and digestible way. But before you go, two things. I was hoping you could then tell us either what you offer or what's available or what people can do to protect themselves or recover or whatever. And also, where can people find you? Where can they learn more? Where can they get access to your information? And I think that's really important. Some people will be listening to this on an audio platform, and even though at a future time they can go to the description and find your links, it's still good for them to hear it, hear you tell them where they can find you. So basically, just conclusions and anything you want to tell us. Take
Yeah.
your time, no rush,
Okay.
and
Okay.
where can people find you?
Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to say this. I think, and I strongly believe that our higher power, God, whoever that may be for you, is the ultimate programmer. And in the end, the ultimate programmer will win. Okay. As long as we continue to exercise our perceived free will. And what does that mean? There are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who are selfless and those who are selfish. Unfortunately, the ones who are selfish are the psychopaths who use this technology um, more for control and their own monetary benefit than they do for the general caring of the human species. Then you have those who are selfless. And those who are selfless, I always say this, is if you put others first, the love and the resources come back exponentially, and so does the power. And that's what really needs to happen now. What do we do? What can you do if you think you're a victim of this phenomenon? You can contact us at www.mind, M-I-N-D, nexus, N-E-X-U-S, live.com, and get on our email list and ask whatever question you have. We do offer preliminary uh, RF scanning services to help you on your journey to gather evidence if you feel that you're a victim of this. So that is something that we do. We are now touring the United States and doing clinics. Our next clinic is going to be in Los Angeles, California, and I believe we're going to be in New York after that. So if you're interested, definitely look at that. We will come out to your region if you have enough people and it makes sense for us to go there. We would definitely do that for you. So that is an opportunity for you. But what really needs to happen? In light of finding out about the Cures, the 21st Century Cures Act, and that it was codified in 2024, I encourage you, everyone, even in Canada or other countries, to look for legislations that protects these entities for non-consensually experimenting on you. That's very important because that's where you're going to know what avenues you need to take. And what we're going to begin to do here in the United States is I'm actually working on it this week. I hope to have it out by next week. Is we're starting a petition against non-consensual experimentation and to have them retract Section 3024 of the Cures Act, and in fact to make it um, unconstitutional and illegal to do any type of experimentation on any human being under any circumstances without consent, particularly when there is no oversight. And we are going to mandate that there be a third party entity that does oversight that cannot be related to that industry whatsoever, so that they don't have influence by big pharmas or these big corporations to basically do what they've been doing, secretly maneuvering and lobbying to basically create legislation and laws that makes our rights less than animals, because animals have more rights than us today. We're not even considered at that level when you think about this. So that's going to be coming out. Please look for that. And it's important that every one of us out there takes our head out of the sand. We can no longer be the sheeple. We need to stand up and be the lions that protect our cubs, because that's what this is about. This is about your future generations, your children, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, and all the loved ones and people who are important to you. Because I want you to think about how many of the people who are homeless have been forced that way, because a lot of the victims do become homeless. How many of the
Mhm.
people are falsely incarcerated because of this, because they were forced to do something that they would not normally do? And how many people who are forced into psychiatric institutions that shouldn't be in there? Remember, now is the time.
Wonderful. Wow. Well, I hope to have you back. You're such a wealth of information and it's so critical. It's not fun to learn this stuff, but if we don't learn about it, how are we supposed to wake up and then work at protecting ourselves? And I agree. I think a spiritual approach is more important now than ever, to get in contact with or connect with our higher selves, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it. That I believe is much more powerful than any human, or I don't know, possible entity that's nefarious here on earth. And I think
Yeah.
it's important. So,
So
thank you.
this
Go ahead.
encompasses everyone. Remember, this is the mark of the beast, and that's what we're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really, really good point. I also believe that, when they got to the point where they were trying so hard to pressure us to get a procedure a few years ago, I right away, that's what came up for me, that this was either the beginning of or was the mark of the beast. And I knew I had to say no, and it created a lot of hardship for me. Now, there are other people in the audience who were forced into it one way or another. They had to work and they needed to provide for themselves, or they needed another kind of medical procedure that they couldn't have unless they got it. So I'm certainly not trying to say this group is better than that group, but I don't know what to say, but I do know that we have free will, and that there has to be things that we can do to resist and to stay close to our integrity and resist. I think it's really, really important. I also think it's really important for us to look after ourselves, what we eat, getting enough sunshine, who we associate with, what we use for entertainment. I think it's a whole, we basically need to recreate ourselves in a whole new way of being, to give ourselves every opportunity, to have the kind of life that we promise. And life is short, and but still, I don't want to squander my life. I know that for sure. So, Jesse, love to have you back another time. I thank you so much for the wealth of information and the work that you do. It's so important. I also want to thank the audience, those that are here in the live chat, those that are listening on replay. Please share this with your family and friends. It's absolutely vital information. And I guess that's it. Do you have anything else you want to add before we go, Jesse?
Yeah. Also, if you get an opportunity, we do hold these retreats, and when you talk about spiritualism and raising your vibration, and really having a life changing experience, uh, attending one of our retreats will do that, and I can attest to it. I It happened to me, and I was completely unexpected. So
Mhm.
our next one is in October of this year, here in the Sierras. So if you get an opportunity to come on out, visit our website, reserve your spot, and love to see you.
Wonderful. And again, the links, everybody, are below. So that's it for today. We'll see you Sunday for the Aliens and Angels podcast. And then I'll be back again next week for the Quantum Guide Show. I want to thank everybody and wish you a wonderful week. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.
I think.
Thank you for joining me for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change that you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to my YouTube and other channels at Karen Holton TV. Click the like button, leave me a comment, and share this podcast with your friends. Read about my true life ET contact in my book called Transdimensional: Meet the New Neighbors, which is now available in Amazon bookstores worldwide. Check out my website at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you will find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton, and also the Aliens and Angels podcast on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.